The covered casserole arrived with her mother-in-law's sweetest smile. But Claire knew it carried death. The next morning, when her mother-in-law asked hopefully whether she had eaten it, Claire answered innocently that her husband and his mistress had finished every last bite. The older woman's face went pale, and then she collapsed. The trap had turned back on the one who set it. Before the story begins, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what you're doing while you listen. Are you sweeping, mopping, lying down, relaxing on the couch, cooking, driving, or just taking a break? All right, let's get into the story. The living room felt suffocating. Even though the morning sun was shining brightly outside, Claire Parker sat on the single armchair with one leg crossed over the other, her eyes fixed on the front door, which had just been knocked on impatiently. She knew exactly who it was. That rough, demanding rhythm belonged to only one person, Linda Miller, her own mother-in-law. Claire drew a long breath, straightened the simple house dress she wore at home, and changed the cold expression on her face into the timid, obedient, slightly frightened look she had always shown in front of her husband's family. She walked slowly toward the door, letting the knocking sound one more time before her hand turned the lock. The moment the door opened, Linda Miller stood there with her chin lifted high. The middle-aged woman wore a flashy church dress and so much gold jewelry that her bracelets jingled every time she moved her wrists. The contrast with Claire, bare-faced and plain, was almost ridiculous. But there was something strange in Linda's eyes that morning. Her gaze moved wildly over Claire from head to toe, as if she were searching for signs of pain, weakness, or sickness. The smile on those bright red lips was not the smile of a loving mother greeting her daughter-in-law. It was the terrifying smile of anticipation. Without asking permission, Linda stepped inside and shoved past Claire with her shoulder, as if her daughter-in-law were nothing more than a clump of dust blocking the way. She sat down on the main sofa and kept staring at Claire, who now stood with her head lowered in front of her. Claire's heart beat calmly, very calmly. It was nothing like the storm of hatred roaring inside her chest. She knew exactly what her mother-in-law was waiting for. The previous afternoon, Linda had come over carrying a stack of covered casserole dishes filled with lamb stew. It smelled sharp and heavy. She had insisted that Claire eat it all by herself because Ryan was not home. Linda said it was a special family recipe, a stew made with love and prayers so Claire would get pregnant quickly. But Claire knew very well that the harsh smell was not only spices. It was something far more evil. With a voice made as sweet as possible, yet trembling because she could barely hold back her excitement, Linda finally opened the conversation she had really come for. "How are you this morning, Claire? Did you sleep well? And how does your stomach feel?" Claire nodded slowly and answered in a soft voice, saying she was fine. That answer made Linda's forehead wrinkle. The older woman did not look satisfied. She leaned forward, stared directly into Claire's eyes, and asked the question she had come to ask. She asked about the stew she had sent yesterday, whether Claire had eaten it, because it had been cooked specially with love and prayers, so Claire could give her a grandchild soon. Claire stayed silent for a moment, letting the silence hang in the air to toy with her mother-in-law's emotions. She saw Linda's throat move as the woman swallowed. Linda was waiting for the answer she hoped would be news of death, or at least news of terrible illness. Then, with an innocent face and wide eyes shining with false honesty, Claire answered. She said she was sorry because she had not eaten the stew. She explained that when she opened the dishes, the smell seemed a little strange, and she had not felt like eating lamb because she was afraid it might raise her cholesterol. Linda's face instantly changed into a mix of disappointment and anger. She was about to snap at Claire for rejecting her gift. But Claire's next sentence froze the blood in the older woman's body. Claire continued her story in a cheerful, deliberately casual tone. She said that, as luck would have it, Ryan had stopped by the house yesterday afternoon to pick up some documents. Ryan saw the stew and said he was starving. Because Claire wanted to be a devoted wife and did not want to waste food his mother had given them, she heated the stew and gave it to Ryan. Linda's eyes went wide. Her pupils shrank. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Claire, savoring every second of that changing expression, added seasoning to the story. She said Ryan had not eaten it alone. Ryan had said he was taking the stew to Jessica's apartment. Jessica was the woman Ryan had always introduced as a coworker, though in truth she was the mistress Linda herself approved of as the better woman. Claire said innocently that Ryan had called her last night. He told her that he and Jessica had eaten the stew with such appetite that even the gravy was gone because it tasted so delicious. At that moment, time seemed to stop for Linda. Her face, which had looked flushed under thick makeup, turned pale as paper. Cold sweat the size of corn kernels began to break out across her forehead. Her hands, heavy with gold rings, started shaking violently. She gripped the arm of the sofa with desperate strength. Inside Linda's head, a horrifying scenario spun at full speed. The high dose of poison she had mixed into the stew. The poison that was supposed to kill Claire slowly, so it would look like a sudden illness. Now it had gone into the body of her beloved son, and the woman she had promoted as her ideal daughter-in-law, the woman she believed would bring wealth into the family. Linda imagined Ryan and Jessica dying in that luxury apartment, foam spilling from their mouths. Linda's breathing became ragged, short, and fast. She tried to stand, perhaps to scream or run and save her son, but her legs had no strength. She could only point at Claire with a violently trembling index finger. Her lips moved without forming clear words. Only strangled groans came out of her throat. Claire still stood there, looking at her with a deliberately confused expression. "Are you all right, Mom? Why is your face so pale?" The question sounded like a soft mockery in Linda's ears, which were ringing loudly. A moment later, Linda's body went rigid. Her eyes rolled upward until only the whites showed. Her body convulsed violently on the sofa, shaking the coffee table with the force of her kicking legs. A thin foam began to appear at her mouth, exactly like what she had imagined happening to Ryan. Claire did not move right away. For several seconds, she stood frozen, staring at her mother-in-law being struck by instant karma with a gaze untouched by pity. Deep inside, Claire smiled with satisfaction. She knew a heart attack or a mild stroke caused by extreme shock was now tearing through that old body. Only when Linda's body slumped weakly and she passed out did Claire begin acting panicked. She screamed for the neighbors and ran outside with her face flooded by manufactured tears. She cried hysterically, saying her mother-in-law had suddenly collapsed. Neighbors rushed over, an ambulance was called, and chaos erupted in the front yard. When the paramedics lifted Linda's body into the ambulance, Claire climbed in with them, her face swollen from crying. But behind the handkerchief covering half her face, Claire's lips curved into a thin, terrifying smile. Her revenge had only just begun, and the first act had been won completely without her having to dirty her own hands. The hospital hallway felt cold and smelled sharply of disinfectant. Claire sat in a waiting chair with her back straight, ignoring the rush of nurses passing back and forth. Her mind drifted backward, down the corridor of memory to 1 year earlier. Back then, she was still a woman blinded by love, a woman who believed marriage was the final safe harbor. She had no idea she was handing her own neck to a hungry, parasitic family that had already prepared the noose. Claire remembered how the disaster began. It started with a lie Ryan had woven so neatly. The man she had once thought of as a prince turned out to be nothing more than a gifted actor. In the beginning, Ryan came to propose with a convincing appearance. He claimed to be a successful contractor starting a large project out of state. He always looked polished in crisp shirts, and he drove a car that Claire later learned was a daily rental. Ryan knew very well that Claire was an only child whose parents had passed away. He knew she had inherited a sizable piece of land on the outskirts of the city. Ryan and his mother, Linda, did not see Claire as a life partner. They saw her as a walking safe whose lock could be picked with sweet words. They thought Claire was a naive small-town girl who knew nothing about money. After the wedding, Ryan's mask slowly began to crack. In the first month, he claimed his project had been delayed because of permitting issues. In the second month, he said a business partner had cheated him and he needed emergency capital. Claire, who still trusted her husband completely at the time, gave him part of her savings. But that money never became business capital. Sound found out through receipts, left in the pockets of Ryan's pants when she did the laundry. The money had vanished into online gambling and late-night clubs. When Claire asked him about it, Ryan exploded. He cursed her as a wife who did not support her husband, a wife who counted every penny, a wife who did not know how to be grateful. Claire's suffering became complete with Linda's interference. Her mother-in-law never allowed Claire even one peaceful day. Every visit came with something to criticize. Claire's cooking was bland. The house was not clean enough. But the cruelest insults were about Claire's womb. Linda often hinted in front of relatives that Claire was barren ground, unable to give the family descendants. The truth was that Ryan rarely touched Claire and refused to get checked by a doctor. Claire swallowed every insult whole. She tried to be a patient, devoted wife. She hoped that someday her husband's heart and her mother-in-law's heart would soften. But the turning point in Claire's heartbreak came 6 months ago. Ryan had started coming home late more and more often, or not coming home at all, saying he had overtime at the project site. Then one day, Ryan brought a woman to the house. Her name was Jessica Walsh. Ryan introduced her as his new secretary, someone helping him handle project administration. Jessica looked stylish, carrying a bag that appeared expensive and speaking in a spoiled, sugary tone. What shattered Claire's heart was not Jessica's arrival, but Linda's welcome. Linda greeted Jessica with a warm hug, as if Jessica were the true daughter-in-law. Right in front of Claire, Linda praised Jessica over and over. She compared Jessica's smooth, pale skin to Claire's warmer brown complexion. She praised Jessica for looking classy and rich, unlike Claire, whom she called tacky, just because Claire liked wearing simple house dresses at home. Claire was treated like a servant in her own house. She was ordered to make drinks and prepare lunch for Ryan, Linda, and Jessica, who sat laughing in the living room. They talked about fictional business deals, vacation plans in Miami, and a bright future, as if Claire did not exist. What they did not know was that Claire was not as poor or as stupid as they believed. The house they were living in, the house Ryan thought was rented with money he paid, had actually been bought outright by Claire with her father's inheritance long before the marriage. The deed was safely stored in a bank-safe deposit box, not in a drawer at home. Claire also owned the majority shares of a textile company managed by a person she trusted, her mother's older brother. Claire had deliberately hidden her true identity because she wanted to find a man who loved her sincerely for who she was, not for her wealth. Unfortunately, she got Ryan. One night, Claire pretended to be asleep while Ryan talked on the phone on the bedroom balcony. His voice was clear in the silence of the night. He was speaking to Jessica in a disgusting, affectionate tone. "Be patient, baby," Ryan said. "That idiot still has one more piece of land she hasn't sold. Once she sells it to pay off my gambling debt, the debt I told her was for the project. We'll take the money, and then I'll divorce her. After that, we'll get married for real. My mom can't wait to have a daughter-in-law like you. Not boring, little Claire." Those words stabbed into Claire's chest, sharper than any blade. That night, under the blanket, Claire did not cry. Her tears had already dried up. Her sincere love had turned to ash, and from that ash rose a burning resolve. She realized she had not only been betrayed, she was being robbed slowly and planned for disposal like trash once they had drained her dry. Ryan's lies about work, Linda's fake affection, and Jessica's cunning, especially when Claire discovered Jessica was Ryan's former girlfriend who had come back because she thought Ryan had become rich. All of it became fuel for Claire's hatred. Claire began investigating more deeply. She secretly hired a private investigator. The facts she uncovered were shocking. Ryan had actually been fired from his real job as a factory worker a year earlier, even though he had claimed to be a contractor. All this time, they had been living off Claire's savings, which he had been draining bit by bit. Jessica herself was not a rich girl. The designer bags she carried were cheap knockoffs, and she was an unemployed woman drowning in payday loans and online debt. Together, Ryan, Jessica, and Linda were a group of parasites trying to suck Claire's blood until nothing was left. Once Claire knew all of that, she stopped being a victim. She began playing her own role. In front of them, she became more obedient, more foolish, and more innocent. Behind the scenes, she started building a plan. She let them feel like they were winning. She let them feel they had the upper hand until they got careless. And today, in this hospital, Claire stared at the emergency room doors with an empty expression that was full of calculation. She knew the poisoned stew was only the opening act. She had not yet played her trump card. She had not yet shown them who really owned the stage. Claire squeezed her hands together, feeling the coldness of the wedding ring still circling her finger. It was a symbol of a sacred promise that had been stained with poison and betrayal. She swore there would be no forgiveness for those who had tried to kill her, mentally and physically. 3 days before the shocking poisoned stew incident, the atmosphere in Claire's house had already felt strange. That afternoon, dark clouds hung low above the roof, casting gray shadows that seemed to predict the storm to come. Claire came home earlier than usual. She told people at her office that she had a headache. But the truth was, she felt uneasy for no clear reason. The instinct of a wounded wife seemed to guide her steps as she entered her own yard carefully. Ryan's car was not in the driveway, which meant her husband was wandering around somewhere, maybe gambling or seeing Jessica. But Linda's flat sandals were on the porch, next to a pair of cheap high heels Claire recognized very well as Jessica's. Claire's heart began pounding. She did not go in through the front door. Carefully, she took off her flats and crept toward the side door that led directly to the kitchen and dining area. The door was slightly open, leaving a gap wide enough for sound to slip out. The smell of cooking drifted from inside. Rich lamb stew full of spices. But that smell was quickly covered by laughter that sounded evil and sharp in her ears. It was Linda's voice, laughing brightly with Jessica. Claire pressed her back to the outside wall and held her breath. She peeked through the crack in the door. There, in her own kitchen, she saw a sight that made her blood boil and freeze at the same time. Linda stood in front of the stove, stirring a large pot of stew. Jessica stood beside her, holding a small brown paper packet. Their faces looked excited, like 2 witches brewing a potion of death. Linda's raspy voice sounded clear. She told Jessica to pour the contents of the packet in little by little. Linda said coldly that they could not pour it all in at once. The goal was to keep Claire from dying suddenly, because that might raise suspicion with the police. The plan was to make Claire sick first. She would vomit blood. Her organs would slowly fail. It would look like a mysterious illness or some terrible natural condition no one could explain. That way, when Claire eventually died, everything would look normal, and Ryan could quickly take care of the death certificate and inheritance without obstacles. Claire's hand shook violently as she covered her own mouth so she would not scream. Tears of rage filled her eyes. She had known her mother-in-law was evil, but she had never imagined the old woman was a cold-blooded murderer. Claire realized her life was being gambled away at her own dining table. Jessica laughed softly in response to the instructions and asked whether it would make the stew taste bitter. Linda brushed off the concern, saying the thick seasoning would hide the taste of the high-grade rat poison they were sprinkling in, instead of barging in and creating a scene that would only make them more cautious. Claire backed away slowly. She remembered a package she had bought online the previous week. It contained 3 tiny wireless surveillance cameras, each about the size of a shirt button. At first, she had bought them only to monitor whether Ryan brought Jessica into their bedroom while she was at work. But now their purpose had changed. They had become tools to save her life. Claire waited for her chance. When she heard Linda and Jessica move to the living room to watch television while waiting for the stew to finish cooking, Claire slipped in through the back door with lightning speed. Holding her breath, she installed one small camera in the upper corner of a kitchen cabinet, aimed straight at the stove. She hid another among the decorative flowers in the dining room, the last one she placed in the family room. The cameras connected directly to cloud storage on her smartphone. After making sure the cameras were active, Claire did not stop there. She used the small window of time to enter Ryan's home office, which was usually locked. But that day, out of carelessness, the door was slightly open. On the messy desk, under a stack of car magazines, Claire found a red folder. Her hands quickly opened it. Inside were loan agreements with loan sharks and illegal online lenders. The numbers were staggering, reaching well over $100,000. But what made Claire's go wide was the collateral. Listed there was the deed to the house they lived in. Claire almost laughed bitterly. Ryan, that stupid husband of hers, had apparently forged the deed to this house. The original deed to the beautiful home was safely stored in a bank-safe deposit box under Claire's name, where it had been since before the marriage. Ryan had apparently paid someone to create fake ownership documents so he could get loans. This was the second deadly weapon. With this evidence, Claire could send Ryan to prison for forging government documents and committing fraud. That afternoon, Claire slipped out of the house the same way she had entered, without being seen. She went to a nearby coffee shop and calmed her still shaking body. On her phone screen, she replayed the newly recorded security footage. The image of Linda sprinkling the poison powder was captured very clearly. Even the audio of their rotten conversation was crisp. Claire saved the file in 3 different places: on her phone, on her laptop, and by sending it to the email of her father's trusted attorney. That day, Claire returned home as if nothing had happened. She greeted Linda and Jessica with her usual friendly smile. Though her heart screamed with disgust, she even praised the smell of the stew. That made Linda smile triumphantly, convinced her plan was going smoothly. Claire now held weapons of mass destruction against this parasitic family. She only needed to wait for the right moment to pull the trigger. And that moment came 3 days later, when Linda forced her to eat the stew alone. Claire was ready. She would not be the victim. She would be the judge, the prosecutor, and the executioner for everyone who had betrayed her. Back in the present, in the hospital corridor that smelled of antiseptic, Linda was still lying in intensive care after suffering a mild stroke caused by the severe shock of hearing Claire's invented story. In the VIP waiting room, Claire sat with her face arranged to look worried, but her eyes stayed alert, watching everything. Ryan stood across from her with his head lowered, tugging at his own hair in frustration. Jessica sat beside him, stroking his back in an exaggerated, performative way while occasionally throwing Claire a sharp, hateful glance. Ryan suddenly stood and glared at Claire. His voice was tight but full of anger. He blamed Claire for what had happened. He accused her of being careless because she had given spoiled food to his mother. Of course, Ryan knew nothing about the poison. He only knew his mother had collapsed after hearing the stew had been eaten by him. Claire lowered her head and played the guilty wife. She apologized in a quiet voice. She said she never meant to shock Linda. She had only been telling the truth, that the stew had been finished by Ryan and Jessica. It was a lie she was still maintaining to keep the drama running. Behind her sad face, Claire's mind worked rapidly, arranging her strategy. When Ryan and Jessica became busy arguing quietly about who had to stay with Linda that night, Claire excused herself for a moment, saying she wanted to buy food and pick up medicine. As soon as she was out of their sight and inside her car in the parking lot, the sad expression vanished. It was replaced by a cold look full of determination. Claire took out her private phone. She called Charles Hamilton, the senior attorney, who had once handled her father's assets and was now the only person who knew Claire's true identity as the sole heir. Hamilton's deep voice came through the phone, asking for her next instructions. Claire gave her orders clearly and without hesitation. She asked Hamilton to immediately process the lab test results from the stew sample Claire had secretly secured before throwing the rest down the drain. That morning, before Linda came to demand an answer, Claire had already taken a small amount of the broth and meat, placed it into a sterile sample bottle, and sent it to a private forensic lab through a courier. The preliminary results Hamilton sent by text made a thin smile appear on Claire's lips. Positive for arsenic in a dose that could be fatal if consumed regularly or cause permanent organ damage. This physical evidence, combined with the security footage, was more than enough to drag Linda into prison for life on charges of attempted premeditated murder. But Claire did not want merely to imprison them. That would be too easy and too quick. She wanted to destroy them completely, mentally, socially, and financially. She wanted to humiliate them in front of everyone who had ever looked down on her. Claire instructed Hamilton to prepare the asset ownership documents, proof of company transfers Ryan had stolen, and evidence of Ryan's debts. Everything had to be arranged neatly in a presentation. Then Claire called an expensive caterer and an event planner. She ordered rush service for an event 2 days later. The title of the event sounded very noble: a recovery dinner and prayer gathering for Linda Miller. Claire planned to bring Linda home in 2 days, under the excuse that she would be more comfortable recovering there. In truth, her goal was to lead the prey into the final trap. She would invite everyone: Ryan's arrogant extended family, the neighbors who often gossiped about her, Linda's sharp-tongued church ladies and social circle. She would even invite Jessica's supposed co-workers, if Jessica truly had a job, and Ryan's hangout buddies. Claire imagined the scenario: a lively gathering, delicious food, and at the peak of the event, she would play a family memory video that was actually a recording of their crime. It would be the perfect stage for a public execution. Claire wanted to see their arrogant faces collapse when their masks were ripped off in front of hundreds of eyes. After all the instructions were given, Claire returned to the hospital room, carrying takeout for Ryan and Jessica. She handed the food to them with a terrifyingly sincere smile. "Eat, Ryan." "Jessica, you'll need strength to look after Mom," Claire said softly. Ryan took it roughly without saying thank you. Jessica stared suspiciously, but eventually ate too because she was hungry. Claire watched them eat with the gaze of a predator fattening its prey before slaughter. That night, Claire sat beside Linda's bed, while the older woman slept restlessly with her eyes closed. Claire leaned close to her mother-in-law's ear and whispered so softly that Ryan, sleeping sofa, could not hear. "Get well soon, Mom. I've prepared a big party for you at home. Everyone will know how talented you are at mixing ingredients." Linda's finger twitched slightly, a sign that her subconscious had heard the threat. Claire straightened up again and adjusted her mother-in-law's blanket with false affection. Her revenge plan was now fully ripe. There was no way back. The gun had been cocked, the evidence was in hand, and the stage had been prepared. All that remained was to wait for the curtain to open on the final bloody act. Claire felt adrenaline flood her body. The hurt she had kept buried for so long had become fuel, giving her extraordinary strength. She was no longer naive Claire. She was retribution itself, coming to collect what was owed. The fluorescent light in the VIP hospital room glowed coldly, reflecting off the clean white tile floor and creating a sterile, frightening atmosphere. The steady sound of the heart monitor, beep, 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 was the only sign of life in a room that felt frozen. Linda lay weakly on the hospital bed. The right side of her body was numb and stiff from the mild stroke that had struck her after she heard the false news about her son's death. Her eyes, usually sharp and full of calculation, now looked wilted, but fear still shone clearly in them. She was conscious, but her mouth felt heavy. Her tongue was stiff, making it hard for her to say even one clear word. On the long sofa in the corner, Ryan and Jessica sat far apart. Instead of watching over Linda with love, they were busy with their own phones. Ryan looked frustrated and occasionally cursed under his breath while checking his shrinking bank balance through his mobile banking app. Jessica, openly bored, was busy touching up her nails, as if she were at a beauty salon instead of in a hospital room, watching over the woman who might have become her mother-in-law. The sight was deeply ironic for Linda, the son and ideal future daughter-in-law she had defended so fiercely. The two people for whom she had been willing to become a murderer were now ignoring her when she was helpless. The hospital room door opened slowly. Claire entered with graceful steps, carrying a beautifully arranged basket of fresh fruit. Her appearance was a little different that day. She wore a clean white blouse and cream-colored slacks. Her hair was tied neatly, giving her a fresh but still simple appearance. A thin smile sat on her face, hard to interpret. "Ryan, Jessica, you must be exhausted." Claire greeted them in a soft, soothing voice. "I brought fruit and some snacks. If you want to go downstairs for lunch or coffee, go ahead. I'll watch Mom for a while." Ryan immediately looked up. His eyes brightened when he heard the offer. He was already sick of being trapped in that room that smelled like medicine. "Good. At least you know your place. Watch my mother properly. Don't let anything else happen to her because of your carelessness." Ryan barked harshly as he stood and grabbed his leather jacket. He turned to Jessica. "Come on, babe. Let's get something decent to eat outside." Jessica nodded eagerly and tossed her nail polish bottle into her purse without even turning to say goodbye to Linda, who lay helpless in the bed. She walked out behind Ryan. "Don't take too long, Claire. I don't want to be stuck here until tonight," Jessica said sharply before the door closed. Now only Claire and Linda remained in the room. Silence ruled again, but this time it felt much heavier, much more crushing. Claire set the fruit basket on the bedside table, then pulled the visitor's chair closer to the side of the bed, right beside Linda's ear, the one that still functioned normally. She sat calmly and stared at her mother-in-law's face. There was no more fear or innocence in Claire's expression. Her gaze was cold, sharp, and piercing, like a surgical blade ready to peel back the truth. Linda tried to speak. Her lips trembled and moved, releasing only unclear groans. Claire smiled, but the smile never reached her eyes. She leaned forward, bringing her lips close to Linda's ear. "Do you want to ask about Ryan, Mom? You're shocked, aren't you? Seeing Ryan alive and healthy, not poisoned, not foaming at the mouth like you imagined." Linda's eyes widened. Her heart began beating faster. Beep, beep, beep. The rhythm of the monitor began to change slightly. Claire continued whispering in a very relaxed tone, as if telling a bedtime story. "You know that lamb stew you cooked with your secret ingredient? No one actually ate it. I lied, Mom. When you came over and asked me, I immediately knew you were hoping to hear about my death, so I gave you a little surprise. I told you Ryan ate it. And boom, you fainted from fear." Tears began gathering in the corners of Linda's eyes. She wanted to scream, wanted to call a nurse, but her body betrayed her. She was trapped in the prison of her own flesh, forced to listen to the confession of the woman she had always considered stupid. "Why didn't I eat it?" Claire paused for a moment. Her hand reached out to smooth the messy strands of Linda's hair with a touch that was far too gentle, especially compared with her words. "Because I saw you. 3 days ago, I came home early. I was behind the kitchen door when you and Jessica sprinkled rat poison into the pot. I heard everything, Mom. Your plan for me to die slowly, for my organs to fail, for Ryan to take over my assets." Linda's breathing became ragged. The monitor grew faster. Beep, 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 beep. An unbearable panic spread from her chest through her entire body. Her secret was exposed. Her daughter-in-law knew everything. And do you know the most interesting part? Claire took out her phone and played a short video without sound. She turned the screen toward Linda's face. On the screen was high-quality security footage. Linda's wrinkled hand could be seen pouring powder from a brown packet into the stew pot, while Jessica laughed beside her. "I have the recording, Mom, clear as day, and I didn't throw away the stew. The sample is already at the forensic lab. The result came back positive, a high dose of arsenic. The police are only waiting for my report. But relax, I haven't called them yet. I want you to recover first. I want you present at the recovery party I've prepared at the house the day after tomorrow. A welcoming party for my dear mother-in-law. There, in front of all the neighbors and the extended family you're so proud of, we're going to watch this video together." Linda's body convulsed violently. Her eyes bulged as if they would pop from their sockets. Fear of prison, unimaginable shame, and the realization that she had been completely defeated by Claire struck her mind all at once. Her blood pressure shot up. The heart monitor began to shriek, giving a danger warning. A long alarm tone filled the room. The door flew open. A doctor and 2 nurses rushed in with panicked faces. "What happened? What's going on with the patient?" the doctor shouted while checking Linda, who was seizing. Claire immediately stood and stepped back several paces. Her face changed dramatically, filled with worry and artificial tears. "Doctor, please help her. I don't know what happened. I was just massaging her hand, and suddenly she started shaking again. Oh my God, what's happening to Mom?" Claire sobbed in a hoarse, perfectly convincing voice. The doctor became busy giving a sedative injection and stabilizing the patient. He did not suspect the daughter-in-law, who looked so devoted and panicked. Meanwhile, in the corner of the room, behind the hand covering her face as if she were crying, Claire grinned. The first mental attack had succeeded. She had crushed her mother-in-law's will to live. Now Linda would live in terror every second, waiting for the day of judgment coming in 2 days. A prison of the mind was far more painful than a prison made of bars. 2 days later, Claire's house looked lively and festive. A large white and gold tent had been set up in the front yard, sheltering rows of neatly arranged chairs. The aroma of delicious catering drifted through the air, tempting the invited guests who had begun arriving since late afternoon. Claire had gone all out preparing the event. She invited everyone. The neighbors on the block, Ryan's extended family members who had often looked down on her, Linda's sharp-tongued social circle from church and the neighborhood, and even some of Ryan's so-called business associates, who were really his gambling friends. On the front porch, Ryan stood proudly in a new silk shirt he had bought for the occasion. Of course, he had used an additional credit card whose bills were tied to Claire's account. Beside him stood Jessica, wearing a tight lace dress that showed off her figure. She smiled widely while welcoming guests, as if she were the lady of the house. The two of them looked extremely confident. They thought this event was purely Claire's initiative, a form of apology and an attempt to win over her husband's family. They felt victorious. They believed Claire had finally surrendered completely. Linda sat in a wheelchair at the very front, near the small stage that had been prepared. Her face looked much older than it had a few days earlier. One side of her face drooped from the stroke, and her eyes stared blankly, full of fear. She could not say much, only mumble unclear sounds. Every time her eyes caught sight of Claire moving back and forth, calmly managing the caterers, Zin's body trembled. She wanted to warn Ryan. She wanted to scream at Jessica to run, but her tongue was locked. Claire had made sure Linda was comfortable in her wheelchair. She had also locked the wheels, so the older woman could not go anywhere. The event began with polite remarks from the neighborhood association president, followed by a group prayer. Then Ryan climbed onto the small stage, holding the microphone with arrogant flair. "Thank you, everyone, for coming." Ryan's voice rang through the speaker. "We're holding this event as a sign of gratitude for my mother's safety and, of course, to strengthen family ties. As the head of this household, I want to ask for your prayers that my income keeps improving so I can continue making my family happy." Ryan glanced sarcastically toward Claire, who stood in the corner. "And hopefully, my wife Claire can become more capable of managing the household and taking care of her elders from now on." Several members of Ryan's family laughed quietly at the insult. Neighbors whispered among themselves. Claire only lowered her head and smiled faintly. "Be patient," she told herself. "Just a little longer." "Now, before we eat," Ryan continued, "Claire said she wants to play a family memory video. Go ahead. Just don't take too long." Ryan stepped down from the stage and sat beside Jessica, who immediately clung to his arm. The lights under the tent were dimmed. Every eye turned toward the large white projector screens set up at the front. Claire walked calmly to the laptop connected to the projector. She pressed enter. The screen lit up, but no vacation photos appeared. No happy family moments. The video began with a date and timestamp in the upper left corner. 3 days earlier, 4:30 in the afternoon. The image of the house kitchen was clear and sharp. All the guests fell silent in confusion. On the screen, Linda and Jessica stood in front of the stove. Clear audio began filling the yard through the large speakers. "Just pour it all in, Mom. Won't it taste bitter?" Jessica's voice came through clearly. "No, the seasoning is strong. Let that Claire die slowly. Let her organs fail so people think she got sick. Later, when she dies, Ryan can legally marry you, and we can take over her assets." Linda's voice sounded cold and cruel. The party, which had been noisy only moments before, instantly turned silent. A frightening silence. The clinking of forks and spoons stopped completely. Guests' mouths fell open. In her wheelchair, Linda squeezed her eyes shut. Tears rolled down her sunken cheeks. Ryan jumped from his chair. His face went deathly pale. "What the hell is this? Turn it off. Turn it off," he shouted in panic, trying to run toward the projector. But 2 large men, security guards hired by Claire, immediately blocked Ryan's path. Ryan was shoved back until he fell into his chair. The video changed. The next slide appeared. Slide 2. Proof of home ownership. A large scan of the house deed appeared on the screen. The name of the owner was clearly written, Claire Parker. Beside it was a photo of Ryan's loan documents, showing that he had used a forged deed as collateral. Beneath it, in large red letters, was written, Ryan lived in his wife's house, claimed he owned it, and used forged documents to borrow money against it. The neighbors' whispers began turning into loud mockery. "Oh my God. So he's been living off her this whole time. That's insane. A forged deed?" His mother tried to poison her own daughter-in-law. Jessica tried to slip away, but Claire picked up the microphone. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and cold. It was completely different from the Claire they thought they knew. "Wait, Jessica, don't leave. The show isn't over yet." The spotlight shifted toward Jessica, whose face now looked like that of a walking corpse. Slide 3. Proof of embezzlement and background records. Bank statements appeared, showing money from Claire's textile company secretly transferred by Ryan into Jessica's account. Then came Jessica's old mugshot with the caption, "Former inmate, convicted in a fraudulent investment scheme in 2021. "You see," Claire said loudly, looking straight at the guests, who now stared with disgust at that so-called happy family. "All this time, I stayed silent. I pretended to be stupid. I let my husband call himself a successful businessman, even though he was unemployed and living off my father's inheritance. I let my mother-in-law insult me. But when they tried to murder me with rat poison, I'm sorry, I had to fight back." Ryan shook violently. He looked around. The eyes of the neighbors who had once respected him were now full of hatred. His extended family lowered their heads in shame. No one dared defend him. "Claire, sweetheart, this is a misunderstanding," Ryan tried to say in a trembling voice, but he sounded pathetic. "A misunderstanding." Claire cut him off sharply. "The lab result from the stew came back positive for arsenic, Ryan. The video is here. The motive is clear. You wanted control of my assets. There is no misunderstanding here." Suddenly, police were heard approaching, breaking the night's tension. Blue and red lights flashed and reflected against the tent walls. Claire had called the police at exactly the right time. "Your ride is here," Claire said, pointing toward the gate. Ryan dropped to his knees, his legs giving out. Jessica cried hysterically. Linda, in her wheelchair, could only stare blankly, realizing the rest of her life would be spent behind bars, the fruit of her endless greed. That recovery dinner turned into a night of judgment they would never forget for as long as they lived. The party atmosphere, once warm with the smell of food and laughter, changed drastically into a cold and terrifying slaughterhouse of pride. The night air moving through the yard of the beautiful home felt sharp enough to cut bone, carrying tension so thick it seemed it could be sliced with a knife. The projector light was still shining brightly, displaying Jessica's face in an old jail photo. It was the final stamp of destruction for the woman who had always pretended to be a socialite. The guests, made up of neighbors, Ryan's distant relatives, and Linda's social circle, stood frozen in place. No one dared move. It was as if their feet had been nailed to the ground by a mixture of curiosity and horror. They were living witnesses to the collapse of a perfect family performance, watching it turn into the ugly ruins of lies. The sound of police sirens grew closer, splitting the silence of that upscale suburban street. Blue and red rotating lights flashed wildly against the white tent, creating frightening dancing shadows across the pale faces of Ryan, Jessica, and Linda. 3 patrol cars stopped right in front of the wide-open gate. The doors opened almost at the same time, and 6 uniformed officers stepped out with firm expressions that offered no compromise. Their footsteps, striking the paved driveway, sounded like death bells for the villains on this stage. Ryan, who had still been trying to deny everything with a red, panicked face, suddenly felt his legs turn to jelly. His knees shook so badly that he had to grip the edge of the buffet table to keep from collapsing. He stared blankly at the officers walking toward him. In his panicked mind, he tried to find an escape, an alibi, or someone else to blame. But the evidence Claire had shown on the big screen was too strong, too naked, and too devastating. There was no opening left. Ryan turned toward Claire, hoping to find some trace of love or pity in his wife's eyes. What he found, instead, was the ice-cold gaze of a woman who had killed her own mercy. A police officer stepped forward, cutting through the crowd as guests quickly moved aside to make room. He stopped directly in front of Ryan, who now looked like a soaked rat. "Ryan Miller?" the officer asked in a heavy, intimidating voice. Ryan could not answer. His tongue felt frozen. He could only give a weak nod, based on a report from Mrs. Claire Parker and the preliminary evidence we have received. "You are under arrest on suspicion of corporate embezzlement, forgery of official property documents, and conspiracy in an attempted premeditated murder," the officer said loudly, deliberately making sure every guest could hear. The click of the metal handcuffs locking around Ryan's wrists sounded painfully clear to everyone. Ryan began to cry. Not tears of regret, but tears of fear from a coward, unprepared to face the consequences of his actions. "Officer, this is a misunderstanding. I was framed. My wife is crazy. She's slandering me," Ryan babbled hysterically, struggling as two officers led him away. "Jessica, tell them." "Jess, we didn't do anything wrong." Jessica, seeing Ryan dragged away like a criminal, immediately lost her sweet mask. Her pretty face turned fierce with panic. When a female officer approached her, Jessica stepped backward in fear until she hit a chair. "Don't touch me. I don't know anything. Ryan forced me. Ryan told me to buy the poison. I'm just a victim," Jessica shrieked, trying to dump all the blame on her secret lover. The betrayal among criminals happened so quickly and so disgustingly that the neighbors shook their heads in revulsion. "Jessica Walsh, you are also being taken into custody on suspicion of involvement in attempted murder and identity-related fraud. You can explain everything at the station," the female officer said firmly. Gripping Jessica's arm and cuffing her, Jessica screamed and kicked, ruining the shape of her expensive dress, which now looked ridiculous. Meanwhile, Linda's arrest became the most tragic and satisfying sight for Claire. The old woman, who usually acted arrogant and always held her head high, now sat helplessly in her wheelchair. Drool slipped from the corner of her crooked mouth, damaged by the stroke. Her eyes moved wildly with fear as the police uniforms came closer. She wanted to scream. She wanted to curse Claire as an ungrateful daughter-in-law, but her voice came out only as strange, pitiful groans. A police medical officer stepped forward to examine her condition briefly before deciding she could be transported and detained under guard at a hospital ward. "Linda Miller is being named the primary suspect in the attempted arsenic poisoning case," the officer announced to the crowd. As Linda's wheelchair was pushed toward the police ambulance, she passed Claire. For a moment, time seemed to slow down. Linda looked at Claire with pleading eyes. Maybe she hoped Claire would soften after seeing her sick mother-in-law's condition. Claire stepped closer, bent slightly, and spoke loudly enough for Linda and the people around them to hear. "Do you remember that stew, Mom? You said it would taste better eaten while it was hot. Well, karma is the same way. It's best served while it's still hot. Enjoy the rest of your life in prison. And don't worry about the food there. I'll make sure there's no rat poison in it." Those words were the final knockout blow. Linda closed her eyes, her tears poured out. Her shoulders shook violently with soundless sobs. She was pushed into the vehicle, leaving behind the house she had once dreamed of controlling. Instead, it became the place where she lost everything. After the three suspects were taken away in a noisy procession of police vehicles, the atmosphere in the yard still had not settled. Claire climbed onto the small stage Ryan had used earlier to show off. She took the microphone and looked one by one at the neighbors and relatives who still stood there with stunned faces. "Ladies and gentlemen, everyone," Claire said, her voice calm and dignified. "I apologize that this recovery dinner turned into a mess, but I think we can all agree that clearing trash out of a house is the truest form of gratitude. Please continue eating if you still have an appetite. The food is clean, safe, and paid for with my own money, not money from scams." Then Claire pointed toward two large suitcases that her housekeeper had prepared in the corner of the porch. They contained Jessica's belongings from the few days she had spent there. "Security," Claire ordered firmly. "Please throw those suitcases into the dumpster at the front of the neighborhood. I don't want the smell of betrayal left anywhere in my house." The guards immediately lifted the suitcases and carried them out, followed by the eyes of the guests. One neighbor, the wife of the neighborhood association president, who had often believed Linda's sweet lies, gathered the courage to approach Claire. Her face was full of regret. "Claire, we're sorry. We had no idea Ryan and his mother were that evil. We thought, it's all right," Claire cut in with a small smile. "A scammer's job is to deceive people, but now all of our eyes are open. I hope this becomes a lesson. Don't judge people by their cover, and don't underestimate someone's silence." That night ended with an awkward dispersal of the party. The guests went home carrying the hottest gossip they would talk about for years. Claire stood alone in the middle of the yard as it slowly emptied. The projector lights had been turned off. The tents were being taken down. She drew a long breath, taking in the night air, which now felt much fresher without those parasites in it. Her shoulders, tense for an entire year under the weight of everything, could finally relax. There were no tears of sadness. There was only a relieving exhaustion, like the kind you feel after climbing a tall mountain and finally reaching the summit safely. Claire looked up at the dark night sky and whispered thank you to herself. Thank you for surviving. Thank you for being brave enough to fight back. Thank you for winning this battle in the most elegant way possible. 6 months had passed since that shocking night of judgment. Time moved on, carrying the seasons with it, washing away the traces of rain and storms and replacing them with warm sunlight. In a modern office building downtown, a young woman walked confidently across the lobby. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the marble floor, radiating powerful self-assurance. Employees who passed her bowed their heads respectfully and greeted her as Director Parker. The woman was Claire. She was no longer the housewife in a worn house dress, lowering her head in fear before her mother-in-law. She had now taken full control of her father's textile company. Under her leadership, it had risen from stagnation and achieved major profits. In her spacious office with glass walls overlooking the city skyline, Claire sat in her comfortable leather chair. On her desk lay a local newspaper. At the bottom of the crime section was a small article many people might have overlooked, but not Claire. The headline was short. Female inmate dies from stroke complications in correctional facility clinic. It was the news of Linda Miller's death. Claire read the article without expression. The report said Linda had died in loneliness. Since her detention, her condition had continued to decline. The stroke she suffered worsened because of severe depression. No family visited her. No women from her social circle came bringing fruit or flowers. She spent her final days on a thin prison mattress, unable to speak, unable to move, able only to stare at the damp ceiling of her cell while regretting her greed. According to the article, before she died, she often hallucinated about a casserole dish of stew, crying silently and calling Ryan's name, though he could not hear her. Her death was quiet, pitiful, and mourned by no one. Claire slowly folded the newspaper and threw it into the trash. There was no joy, only closure. The chapter about Linda Miller had officially ended. Meanwhile, Ryan's fate was far more terrifying than death. Inside a state prison for general criminal offenders, Ryan became a target. The man who had once acted stylish and arrogant was now little more than skin wrapped around bones. He had lost every shred of respect. The other inmates knew his case. A husband who tried to kill his wife for her money and used forged property documents to secure loans. In the harsh world of prison, crimes against a wife, even when his own mother had been his accomplice, were often treated with contempt. Ryan was beaten often, his food was stolen, and he was forced to serve stronger inmates. Every night, Ryan curled up in the corner of his cold cell, hugging knees covered in bruises. Regret haunted him every second. He imagined the soft bed in Claire's house, Claire's warm meals, and the sincere smile of the wife he had thrown away. He missed the comfortable life he had lost simply because he never knew how to be satisfied. He heard the news of his mother's death from a prison guard. That day, Ryan howled like a madman and slammed his head against the wall until it bled. He realized he was the cause of his mother's death. He was the one who had dragged her into that rotten plan. The guilt became a prison inside the prison, torturing him more cruelly than any guard ever could. And what about Jessica? That snake of a woman met a fate that was no better. After serving a shorter prison sentence because she was considered only an accomplice, Jessica was released. But her freedom became a new kind of hell. Her criminal record kept her from getting a decent job. Her face, which had gone viral on social media as the poison mistress, was recognized everywhere. She was thrown out of one rented room after another. Her socialite friends blocked her number. Now, Jessica lived in a cramped, run-down room on the flood-prone edge of town. The beauty she had once been so proud of had faded under the harshness of life and poor nutrition. She worked odd jobs washing dishes at roadside diners, earning only enough to eat once a day. Every time she saw an expensive car pass by, her heart ached, remembering that she had almost had that life. But the image of Claire throwing her suitcases out beyond the gate always returned, reminding her that she had lost completely. She lived in fear of being chased by collectors from the online loans she had once used to finance her fake lifestyle. Her life now was only running and hiding. Back at Claire's beautiful home, golden afternoon sunlight streamed through the balcony windows. The house had been renovated. Claire had thrown away all the old furniture that Ryan and his family had touched. The walls were repainted in bright colors, giving the house a fresh and positive atmosphere. There was no trace of bitter memories left there. Claire sat comfortably in a wicker chair on her bedroom balcony, enjoying a warm cup of chamomile tea. She had just finished doing yoga. Her body felt healthy, her mind clear. She looked at the backyard, now full of blooming flowers she had planted with her own hands. She felt peace, a peace that had come at a high price, but one worth every struggle. Then her phone vibrated on the small table. A name appeared on the screen. Adam. Claire smiled. This time, the smile was truly sincere and reached her eyes. Adam Carter was her new business partner, a simple but intelligent man who deeply respected women. They had met 3 months earlier at a business seminar, and Adam knew nothing about Claire's past. Yet he treated Claire with great kindness without knowing the full extent of her wealth. Adam liked Claire for her intelligence, not her assets. Claire answered the call. "Hi, Adam," she said softly. "Hi, Claire. Sorry to bother you this late in the afternoon. I just wanted to ask. The project proposal we discussed yesterday was approved. Do you have time for dinner tomorrow to celebrate? Nothing fancy. There's a small barbecue place I love." Adam's voice sounded enthusiastic but polite. Claire laughed softly. An invitation to eat at a simple barbecue place sounded 1,000,000 times more interesting than the fake luxury dinners she used to have with Ryan. "Of course, Adam. I like barbecue. Pick me up at 7. Claire ended the call with her heart blooming. She took another sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through her body. She thought again about that poisoned stew. Once, she had thought it was the end of her life. But it turned out the stew was the beginning of her rebirth. God had saved her in a harsh way, forcing her to see the bitter truth so she could vomit the poison out of her life. Now Claire was whole. She was wealthy. She was strong. She was free. And most importantly, she was happy. The villains had paid their debt to karma in full, and Claire had closed that ledger forever. She set down her teacup, stood, and walked back inside the house. A bright future was waiting for her, and this time, she would hold complete control over the story of her own life. And now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Claire's place? Would you have gone straight to the police, or would you have exposed them in front of everyone first? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story reminded you that silence doesn't mean weakness, give the video a like. Subscribe to the channel and tap the bell so you don't miss the next story.